points here, then we'll jump into lesson 6 on Sunday. I still will be gone next Wednesday, and I'm still looking for a volunteer for class. So if you are interested, so inclined, let me know. I'm sure we'll find someone, but if someone wants to volunteer, it is definitely still open for your leading. All right, so what we're going to talk about is we want to talk about the section that's titled, I Feel Threatened. And basically, it is how we go and confront and talk to someone that is, A, living in sin, B, wandering away, or C, just not paddling. I mean, there's a whole section in here that kind of identifies those three sections, or those three situations, as someone that we need to encourage. Earlier in the book, it talked about what it meant to exhort someone, to motivate them, encourage them passionately to participate. And so this section is going to talk about how do we go talk to someone that we feel is in need of some exhortation, in need of some correcting, or just in need of some guidance. So, as I was reading through this, I thought of a couple scenarios in Scripture that we'll talk about. But what are some principles we need to keep in mind as we go talk to someone? Oh, hang on, we'll wait till Chuck. He is on his
way. Something that I think of is, remember how you would want someone to talk to you if you were being confronted. I think that can help as far as when going to confront someone else. And definitely pray about it before you do anything, because you're a lot less likely to make the wrong move if you put prayer into it first.
Absolutely. When you use the word confrontation, does this have to be a confrontation? Yeah. It can be. It can turn into a confrontation. It can, but it doesn't have to be. If we go in a spirit of love and a spirit of encouragement, and we're all striving for the same thing, how's the best way to make it not confrontation? Don't sound like a jerk. That's true. That is true. There are definite ways to tailor a message that you may say the same thing, but words are extremely important. If you remember, does anybody remember the breakdown of communication? What percentage of your communication is the actual words you use? Pretty small. Anybody remember the numbers? 7%. 7% of your communication is the actual words. 38% is your tone of voice. And the remainder, which I believe is 54%, is your body language. Interestingly enough, today, I had 4 separate people come up to me and ask me, are you feeling a little intense today? And I'm like, no, I feel fine. Why? Like, I was just asking. So apparently the 2 cups of coffee in my morning had me a little bit, I looked a little bit more intense than I felt. I did joke around with them a few times when they'd ask me, I'd yell at them and tell them I'm fine, just for fun. You can do that when it's your kids that work for you. You can bully them. Yeah, you can bully them. But again, our communication and how we approach people, how we talk to them, says a lot about how this is going to go down. What else should we keep in mind? Don't sound like a jerk. Make sure we have appropriate approach and tone. Don't go in for a fight, okay? I think a lot of people, I know Angie Alicia calls that, don't borrow drama. Don't borrow drama going into it. How many of us are guilty of having the planned conversation in your head before you go do it? I know how this is going to go down. I'm going to say this, they're going to say this is going to happen. Does it ever work out that way? Very seldom. Use paper. Okay, Joyce says use paper. Write down what you want to say. And that helps keep you on track. If you're going to go talk to someone about something sensitive, make some notes. Take some time and think out how am I going to approach this topic? Because the last thing we want to do is to try and help someone. So again, that needs to be our attitude. Our attitude doesn't need to be going into it just to prove us right, them wrong, go in bullying somebody, make somebody feel bad. We go in with the attitude of helping. So we need to make sure that we go in with the right attitude. And if we're truly going in for the right attitude, we need to make sure that we take the time and do it right. I thought of a couple examples in Scripture of people that were confronted. Does anybody have any examples from Scripture of, someone that was corrected? That was the first one that came to mind. Nathan and David. So if you look at that, it's in 2 Samuel, I believe. 2 Samuel 12, yeah. I had that wrote down. I've got like 3 of them written down. I couldn't remember which one was which. But 2 Samuel 12, when Nathan goes to David and informs him of his activities, he used the story, he used the parable to get David to see the truth. And David reacted well. David took that information and reacted the right way to it. So, that's a great example of someone that went and corrected someone. Anybody think of any others? Okay. Ananias and Sapphira. Paul with Peter was another one I thought of. Yeah, Galatians 2. Where Paul said he confronted Peter, right to his face and out in public, and said, "Why are you behaving this way when the Gentiles came around, you behaved different?" He confronted him in public, out in the open, about that. And what was Peter's reaction? Anybody remember what Peter's reaction was? Yeah. Yeah, we don't see any more instances where he was that he behaved differently. So we assume that it worked. We assume that he responded properly. Was there any other one? I thought of one more. It's more preemptive. It's more of seeing a scenario that may be coming up and saying, I know this is going to be hard. Here's some things you might consider. Like the book of Philemon. I thought of it. I thought of the book of Philemon where Paul says, I have Philemon, I have Onesimus. It's written to Philemon about Onesimus. Okay. So he writes to Philemon and says, I have Onesimus, and this could be hard for you, but I'm going to implore you to accept him back. Accept him back not only as a slave, but as a brother. So I thought of that. I thought that's a good example of preemptively seeing a potential problem and addressing it beforehand. And so what I want to talk about tonight is I want to talk about, kind of what we see in this lesson, and also what does it take to be able to successfully be able to go to someone and have a hard conversation. What kind of relationship does that take?
Hopefully a relationship, individuals are close to each other to where they feel like you can go to them and correct them without being, feeling like, oh, they're just out after me or, trying to put me down.
You have to have a relationship that is connected. You have to have influence. You know, if you have no influence in my life, if you come to me and I give zero credibility, hey Chuck, we got Emily. If I give zero credibility to what you say, how much influence will that have on my behavior? In our leadership study last night, we talked the whole time we talked about influence, about the story of Joshua and how Joshua grew his influence. By the way, there's an open invitation. I think the next one's going to be on a Saturday morning. We're going to have breakfast and have study. So if you're interested in that, grab one of us. We'd love to have you join us. It's really some good discussion and good time spent together. So, Emily?
I think one example of having that close relationship is whenever Jesus rebukes Peter, whenever he's telling them that he has to go to Jerusalem, and Peter's like, "Far be it, Lord," and he says, "No, get behind me, Satan, like you're hindering me." That's also a good example of it doesn't always have to be this lovey-govey, oh, like it's okay, yeah, you did bad, but it's okay, everything's okay. No, like you did wrong, stop it. Like we need to be firm with one another. So it's shown that's a serious matter, but I mean, obviously Jesus was still doing it in love. Like he loved Peter, but he was stern with him.
I think we see that in Paul too. When Paul went to Peter and rebuked him, I think it was a stern, what do you say? Poor Peter. I mean, he kind of got himself into that a lot. He kind of got himself into trouble on a consistent basis. So again, we do see it takes influence. It takes influence to be able to go to someone and have this hard conversation. It takes having a close relationship. What else? And how can we build these relationships? So if you're the person on the receiving end, or if you're the person on the rebuking, the giving of instruction end, what are some characteristics that we need to adopt to make sure that we are the type of person that is either approachable or that approaches people in the right way?
So, something I immediately thought of was don't just be a critic. Because if you're always criticizing all the time, then it'll get to a point where somebody's going to think that, well, you're just looking for something to be upset about. I mean, even when you read, like I was reading Revelation recently, and a lot of those churches that Jesus was writing to, he said first what he liked about them before getting into the problems that they had. And the same thing's true in a lot of Paul's letters. You know, he would bring up the problems, but he would also say what he was thankful for about them. So I think that was to not give the bad impression, you know, of always being a critic. I think there are very few exceptions where that is necessary to come across as totally critical. If that makes sense what I'm saying.
It does. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
he was talking about in the book about you attack people's sin and not them, you know. Okay, question. What did Paul do to Peter? Did he attack his sin or attack Peter and his sin?
That's a great question. I mean, he Paul went at Peter pretty direct, pretty straightforward. Are you guys familiar with the Oreo sandwich style of reprimand? Yeah, so it's a very simple format, but it's very powerful. To where you praise the person or you give them credit for what they're doing well, then you talk about the problem and address the issue, and you follow it up with praise. So if someone is struggling, I mean, you talk about the initial obedience and their faithfulness to God, then talk about the behavior that is not serving them well, the behavior that is contrary, and how they're walking out of step. And then you can finish it with the desire that we all have to finish this life and end up in the same place. It is a very effective way to make sure that it's not about the person, to where you're not attacking an individual. Because being confronted, being corrected is typically not enjoyable. Scripture says discipline is not enjoyable at the moment, but can produce righteousness. Wildly paraphrased. Yes, Joy.
Was thinking about we need to have some introspection on ourselves, be meek and humble, and really be honest about what is our motive. Is our motive to be right? Is our motive to win? Is our motive to hurt? Is our motive the same as what God's motives are? And then even if, the truth is, even if you go through that introspection and prayer, thank you, and you do it as the best you could have ever done it, there's still no guarantee that the other person is going to handle it in a godly way. And so you hope for that, you pray for that. But I am I'm pretty naive and think that if you do it right, it will work out right 100% of the time. That's not always true. It's the prayer, but it's not always true.
Well, I think this goes back to the conversation that Paul had when he said, I planted, Apollos watered. This falls into the same pattern. The only thing that we're responsible for is the process. We're not responsible for the outcome. I'm not responsible if the person repents. I'm not responsible if the person changes their ways. Only thing I'm responsible for is the message, and did I do my part? Did I reach out? Did I help? Did I approach him? Did I look at these? There's 6 steps that they put in here that Steve put in here on page 36 and 37. The first one is be honest. Evaluate the situation and the person. And I think with that also, we need to make sure that we heed the warning and make sure that we don't go into this with a plank in our eye going, hey, let me tell you what you're doing wrong. But in the meantime, I'm sitting there, knocking things off the wall and knocking things over with this big plank sticking out of my eye. I got this massive sin that people know about that I'm unwilling to address, but I want to, microanalyze you. That's a concern. So we have to be honest with ourselves. And we have to be honest with the situation. Just like Joy said, am I going into this with the right mindset? Am I going into this to make sure that, I want the best for the person? And then number 2, keep current. Make sure you're up to date. Has anybody ever went in to address something that's already been fixed? I mean, you kind of feel like an idiot. I mean, I want to talk to you about this. Well, we already took care of that. This is what happened, what we did. And you're like, oh, you're 6 minutes late to the party, and everything's already taken care of. But make sure that you know what is going on. And a lot of times, you get so much farther just by asking questions. Just ask questions. How is this going? What's going on with this scenario? And then if you find out it's better, it gives you an opportunity to make a deeper connection. Then number 3, this is really important. Act and don't react. Many times we are reactionary creatures. I've seen it many, many, many places. Our lives are 10% what happens to us and 90% how we react. How do we deal with scenario? Do we react or do we respond? And it's always better when we can respond. Stephen Covey talks about that brief moment in time between any stimuli and your reaction. You know, there is a space there. A lot of times we mash them together, and we don't train ourselves to stop and respond appropriately. We just, whatever comes to mind first, we react. But as we mature and as we focus on this and we work on this, we can train ourselves to let whatever comes at you come at you, let whatever happens, stop for a moment, and then respond appropriately. And the more you do that, the easier it is, easier it becomes. But it's an important part in this process to make sure that everything is formatted and framed in the best light, that we can present this to get the outcome we're looking for. And then number 4, don't attack the person, attack the problem. Again, that sandwich style. Every one of us are striving for something, and every one of us have moments in time or periods of time that have things we struggle with. And to be a very active church and to be really close, to be part of one another, to really get the most out of this relationship that God has given us, this family relationship, we have to be willing and able to have some of these hard conversations. Then read and memorize James chapter 5, 19 and 20. What does that say? Anybody have it memorized? Wildly paraphrased, I'm sure someone could. Someone wants to read that. Elizabeth.
My brothers, if one of you should wander from the truth, and someone should bring him back, remember this: whoever turns a sinner from the error of his way will save him from death and cover over a multitude of sins.
So there's a lot of reward and a lot of benefit in God's eyes to this. When we watch out for one another, when we go encourage one another, when we find someone that is wandering away, to get them back into God's good graces, get them away from the sin that they're stuck in. It says there is a great benefit to that. We save a brother, and it's, I won't say charged to our account, but it's a good work in our sight. What does it mean that covers a multitude of sins? So if I can get Brace to quit sinning, does that, negate some of mine? Say, okay, well, these aren't held accountable for him because he got Brace to quit doing that. Is that what that means? What does that mean? One who restores another, it covers a multitude of sins. Wildly paraphrased again.
Right, it's going to be a little bit more broad than just that specific part of the question, but I think when we're approaching someone, and yeah, I've got never been perfect in this matter, but I think you have to distinguish between if there's an obvious sin in there, then yeah, that's what you cover. But I think someone has to be respected. You can give an opinion as long as you express it as an opinion. So if you tell someone you're doing this and this is wrong, or if you say, it looks like you're doing this, in my opinion, if you keep doing that, people are going to misread that, and either you are doing wrong, or at least people can misconstrue that you're doing wrong. So my opinion is you shouldn't do this, even if you're not acting wrong, but you shouldn't do it because the appearance is wrong. Now, how does it affect others? How can you cover a multitude of sins? Others can interpret that in the wrong way and think, well, if it's okay for him to do it, then it must be okay. Others can be affected by your sin in that way. Observations, people could think wrong of that person, even though they're not doing. You and I worked on ice machines and refrigeration equipment, and it wasn't always the best places we worked on that equipment. It was sometimes, but I always tried to make sure I went through the back door of those establishments rather than through the front door, so I could not be interpreted in being in the wrong place, doing the wrong thing. But, that's those kind of things, you're frequenting these places. Well, I am because that's what I'm doing. Now, if I took a job as a beer delivery guy and I'm in and out of these places, I'm not going to, those establishments, that could be sending the wrong thing. Yes, you're gainfully employed. You may not be imbibing, but that doesn't mean that it's a good thing. In my opinion, and you have to tell someone, in my opinion, you should get a different job because that's not something that we would condone, and I don't think that Jesus would condone something like that. So those are the kind of, but you would have to make sure you couch that in by saying, this is wrong, this is sin, you're leading that way, in my opinion. So I think that in a lot of ways it's the appearance of sin and people's interpretation of your actions and people using that as a crutch or an excuse to misbehave on their own can be, like eliminating the first one, you can eliminate people and a multitude of sins in that way. That's not the only way, I'm sure, but somebody else, that's what came to my mind.
Kind of eliminating a domino effect. Well, if this happens, then it could lead to just other bad behavior or sins down the road. Okay. Any other takes on, let him know that he who turned the sinner from the error of his ways will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. I'm kind of curious about and cover a multitude of sins. That to me seems puzzling.
What I got from is kind of what Dan said, future sin, whether it be influence or you correct that person and he's no longer going to continue in that sin, have future sins in that way.
I can see that.
I guess I see this as, if I'm caught up in something that is sinful, it's not very likely that's the only sin I engage in, but that I may make efforts to conceal that sin from other people. So I might become deceitful, lying. I may spread falsehoods. I may put people on the scent to other people's sins. I may get defensive. I may get attacking when someone approaches me, and then I'm got a sin of anger and I'm lashing out at people. To me, I think you're just, not that the person who's turning the sinner is covering sins in their own life, but you're preventing that person from down a pathway of multiplying their sins, because they don't often stand alone. There's usually lots of things that become easier to engage in once you sort of cross the line, especially if you're trying to hide what you're doing, or you're trying to motivate others to see it the way you see it so that you can continue to engage without guilt. I think there's lots of ways to do that, but the most direct, easiest reading of this would be just to say that it's important for us to know that God is faithful to forgive, and that regardless of what those sins are and how many they may multiply, if one is repentant, God is faithful to forgive. And so there are multitudes of sins that God has overlooked, forgiven, and forgotten.
Very true. Yeah, because I like the point, if you're wrapped up in a sin where it's got you derailed from your faith, that's probably not the only sin in your life. Especially when you get into because you're going to. Most of us would try to hide it. You know, we get into a sin, we're going to try to really hide this and protect ourselves. So there's going to be a lot of deceit and lying and putting up fronts and, you know, not letting people as part of our lives. And then always, number 6, pray. Make sure that you always pray for help. You know, pray for wisdom, pray for the right outcome. You know, there's a lot that goes into this. And so this process is pretty simple. I mean, it's a pretty simple process. You know, check yourself, make sure you have the right information, do it with love, don't attack the person, do it for the right reasons, and pray about it. It's a really simple process to do that. Okay, Joy?
I really like that Samantha said that to be first, so I would really like for number 6 to actually be number 1. But the other thing that you could do is the two of you can pray together about it. Take their hands, bow your heads together, and approach God about it.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a great outcome from this. If it ended in that, start there. Okay. You think that's doable? Okay. Yeah, I think that would be a hard first step.
It brings down a whole bunch of, armor. It kind of takes down the offense a bit because people start, we're talking to God here. Together. We're together here in this.
I mean, honestly, I think it would be a great start. I think it would be a hard start. I'm thinking if I was in sin and you came to me, you know, I want to talk about this before we go there. Maybe not. I don't know. I've never tried, so I don't know if it would work or not. I definitely think it would be a great place to start. Right. Yeah.
Begin with a heart, spirit of community and brotherhood, and start there, and that definitely sets the right tone for any conversation to follow. Let us be at peace with one another. Let us keep our cool, God, as we discuss matters that are, about things that are important in our lives, and help us to appreciate one another and the love we have for one another and the relationship we have with one another. This is the perfect place to start.
Yeah, it would be. I can see but I think I was thinking you're going, okay, let's pray about what you're doing wrong. Yeah, pray about having openness. Yeah. I can see that better now. Because my first thought went to, if you come to me and say, okay, we want to pray about your, anger issues, halfway through it, I might hit you with a book or something. But yeah, I can see that makes a whole lot more sense. It's almost slow. All right, so in this, we've talked about this. So what are some things that we need to be on the lookout for? Obviously, the sins that are taking us out of our walk with God. I mean, those are the obvious. If we see someone, and even talked in the lesson, I mean, we're real good about identifying, adultery and revelry and, the party scene. We're really easy. Those are really easy to identify. But what are some subtle things, and how do we approach them? How do we encourage that person that's not paddling? Because when it talked about the 3 times, it talked about the person that is, willfully sinning, the person that, may have a drug problem, a pornography problem, that a bad drinking problem, that is really willfully walking against God. And then we have those that are just wandering away, You know, they're not participating, they're not active. You know, maybe they're not even really involved in a lot of sinful stuff, but they're not doing the things that an active person will do. And then we just have the downright lazy that don't want to do it. How do we approach them? And how do we encourage them? Using this process, this method, how do we encourage them to be more active? We're going back to Joy. You're fine.
Probably because I've done this wrong so many times that I'm, trying to do better with it. And that is to ask questions, like you said, because there's a high probability that I don't have all the information. And so if you ask in a non-threatening way, then things may come together, because two things can look exactly the same, but have totally different meanings. So ask and find out. Not make assumptions. Yeah, that's it.
And in those assumptions, we can't assume someone doesn't want to be active. Instead of, why aren't you active? Maybe what are some things that you get excited about that you'd want to become involved in? Yes, Allison.
I think that asking questions is huge. And I mean, some of the things that you can ask is, like when I used to work at Clarity, and there would be women who would come in a crisis pregnancy and they would want to have an abortion. One of the questions that we would ask them is like, what would need to change, to change your mind? Like, is it your financial situation? Is it, we would ask a bunch of questions about that. And I think that that's also what we can do here. Like, what needs to change to help your situation? What can I do? What can I pray about for you? Questions is huge.
Absolutely. All right. Anything else on how we can approach? And what kind of things are we looking to help people in? So if we look at this approach, what are some things that we are good about encouraging people to get better at? What are some things that we just kind of let slide? One of them was brought up in here is attendance. We did let attendance slide a lot. Something came to back to this. A lot of the way we approach things is so important. How we say things. And something that stuck in my mind that Joy said a few times is, now she's probably a little panic. She's like, hang on, I said something a few times. But she talked about when she was struggling with Jeff, and she went to the elders and said, well, you made your bed, you have to lie in. And that is a struggle that, she was facing, that she reached out, and that made her feel threatened. I mean, she said that it made her feel alone and really bad about this scenario. But the exact same thing could have been said was, you know what, I'm sorry you're going through this. Sometimes there's hard consequences to our behavior and to our choices. How can I help you? Or how can we walk along with you and encourage you in this? Because, sometimes we get into scenarios, and sometimes, there's a phrase, everything happens for a reason, that people like to use. And I like to follow that up with, and sometimes it's because you're stupid and make bad choices. Because sometimes we do. Sometimes we make bad choices and put ourselves in bad scenarios. And sometimes when we're in bad scenarios, we make more bad choices that get us in a predicament that we need help. And we may reach out to somebody. But like we talked about Sunday, there's a reason that God put in Scripture, remember not the sins of my youth. And I don't think that just means little kids. I mean, it could be young in faith. It could be, young in spirit. It could be a lot of things. And when we see this, we have an obligation to look out and say, no matter how and what condition you're in, I have to have the opportunity, the willingness to help you and not make you feel threatened. The last thing that we should want to do is make you feel worse about the scenario you're in. Because a lot of times when you get in that scenario, you feel terrible anyway. The old phrase, don't kick a dog when it's down. Reach down and help every chance you get. And that's really what I think a lot of this chapter is talking about, is to do this with love and encouragement. We don't face a lot of physical threats in our world today, but we face a lot of emotional damage and threat. Yes, Greg.
We've kind of said that there's these buckets where people find themselves in things that are just non-negotiable. Someone is in gross disobedience. But it is interesting that 1 Peter 3 talks about the unbelieving husband, and that the wife is going to, without a word by her behavior, win her husband over. Nagging does not work. Allison learned that really early in our marriage, and I'm so thankful for that. But the point is, we probably would not make application for this verse. We would say if the husband didn't pick up his dirty socks, maybe that's where the chaste and quiet behavior would be sufficient to get the point across. This is an unbelieving husband. And I'm not suggesting that that's the approach we take with every person who's an unbeliever. But what I am observing is it's because of the relationship that existed between the husband and wife there. And that the wife was a believing, obedient wife. There was a powerful influence there that wouldn't exist without that relationship. And in this context, that's the recommended course of action, even for someone who is as far as a denier of Christ. I just find that interesting, because we would say, "Oh no, you gotta say something. You gotta, and I would suppose that with the wife's behavior and her attitude toward her husband, that conversation is going to come up someday, but maybe not today. It's just, I don't know how to make total application of this other than to say we probably wouldn't put this category together to say, let's just be quiet about it and let's just be a good example and see how that works. But I think it's because of the special relationship.
One thing we see in this chapter is there's a biblical model to reaching out to helping those that are wandering far away, those that are just wandering away, and those that are just inactive. Inactive people need encouragement too. And we need to go and we need to encourage them. There's a proper way to do it. It talks about in Matthew 18, it is our responsibility. I see a problem, my job to make the best out of it. And if it's beyond my help, you can take someone with you. There's a lot of tactical ways to do that. But I think the main takeaway from this is if you're going to approach someone, make sure you do it in love and do it in a way that lifts them up. So, all right, we're moving on to lesson 6. Coming up on Sunday, it's called Developing the Battle Plan. Says where there's no vision, the people are unrestrained. So we're going to start talking about setting vision in continuing to being committed to spiritual growth, and then head from there. Appreciate your conversation. Appreciate your participation. And we'll convene again on Sunday.